By the middle of the 18th century, England had become an empire that glittered with the achievements of her statesmen and writers, her clergy, philosophers, craftsmen, and artists. And with the close of the 7 Years' War in 1763, English ships dominated the seas and continued to gather the vast resources of an empire that reached from India and the African coast to the islands of the Caribbean and the colonial outposts of North America. In America, the 7 Years' War had been called the French and Indian War. When it ended, the French had ceded their claims to the Ohio Valley frontier. For the North American colonies, a new period of expansion and growth seemed at hand.
We're all Englishmen, you know, and loyal to England and young King George. Aye. We've the same mind for governing ourselves and protecting our rights and liberties as any Englishman.
Whether his calling was cooper or tinker, tanner or ironworker, by 1763, a tradesman could find a place somewhere in America that needed his services. In the South, huge plantations were busy exporting tobacco, rice, and indigo. Farther north, generations of merchants had built Philadelphia, New York, and Boston into thriving commercial centers. In New England were the towering trees needed to build and maintain the ships of the empire. Also whaling and farming, iron for tools and weapons, and ample woodland to provide shelter and warmth.
We got so much standing timber hereabouts. Well, I expect it'll never run out.
Thus, by the end of the French and Indian War, America had matured socially and politically. The colonists enjoyed one of the highest standards of living and freedom in the world.
Morning. Besides, our taxes are nothing to what they're paying in England.
War in North America and Europe had doubled England's national debt, and Parliament needed to replenish the treasury. But the people of England were already overtaxed, and duty collection in America was costing the Crown 4 times the revenues collected.
Well, there's only a few import duties. And anyway, it's cheaper to bribe the customs officers, so naturally that's the way most of our merchants conduct their business.
Neither Parliament nor the new First Lord of the Treasury, George Grenville, intended the colonies to assist in paying off England's national debt. But it was felt the colonies should pay for their own defense. However, before Grenville could increase the revenues from America, reports of an Indian uprising along the frontier began to reach England.
That'll be Pontiac on the warpath again. If we need to, we'll send a militia out and stop them. Nothing's going to keep us from settling that good virgin land in the Ohio Valley.
Parliament answered the problem of colonial security and Indian discontent by issuing the Proclamation of 1763, which temporarily stopped the colonists from settling the Indian lands west of the Appalachians. It was also decided to maintain an army in America to protect the frontier.
An army? That's not here to protect the colonies. It's here to harass us.
As far as I am concerned, Parliament would keep us from expanding, so we'd have to be more dependent on England.
By 1764, Lord Grenville had notified all British customs officers in America to either enforce the existing trade laws or be dismissed. He also urged Parliament to pass the Sugar Act of 1764, which he called a just and necessary revenue for defraying the expense of defending, protecting, and securing the colonies.
England has no right to put a tax upon us unless we are represented in Parliament. It is only our own assemblies which have the right to tax us.
Not a question of armies or taxes. It's a matter of our natural right as Englishmen to govern ourselves.
May I remind you, our natural rights as Englishmen are to obey the laws of Parliament.
Damn Tory.
The colonies protested the Sugar Act, but Parliament refused to remove the duties it had placed on sugar, Madeira, coffee, textiles, and the molasses so necessary for the making of rum.
It's not the duties. It's the principle that Parliament claims the right to levy such taxes.
200 gallons of molasses at 3 pence a gallon.
Count them again, you dunderhead. There are but 170 gallons here.
We have ways enough to avoid the duties. But if Parliament continues to impose illegal laws upon us, there'll soon be more trouble than the Crown has bargained for.
And I say the duty upon molasses will price the rum trade right out of business. And me with it.
The duty's only half what it used to be, and it's not as if the money were going to England. All revenue will be used to maintain the army for our defense.
Lord Grenville knew the Sugar Act alone could not produce enough revenue to support a standing army in the colonies. Thus, he also proposed that a stamp tax be placed on 25 items, including legal documents, college degrees, pamphlets, newspapers, marriage licenses, and luxury items.
Except no man is going to get born, educated, married, or buried without having to pay Parliament for it. And I don't call that living in liberty.
The colonial assemblies sent petitions to England protesting the Stamp Act. Colonial merchants refused to import any British goods until the new law was repealed. In towns throughout the colonies, men formed groups called the Sons of Liberty to protest direct taxes by Parliament.
This here's an effigy of the Boston stamp tax collector. We're going to warm him up a little till he gets a notion to quit office. Now, we might have to prod him, but sooner or later, he's going to resign.
Yeah, hey, it looks like it's going to be...
Now, let him down gentle. Okay, son, grab him high now. Come on, bring him over to the fire. Right up to the fire now. There's a good path for him. Right up in there now. Keep him in there.
On the day the Stamp Act was to take effect, there were no stamp tax officials in office, and in most of the colonies the tax could not be collected. Parliament was torn between enforcement, modification, or repeal of the Stamp Act. Public and private debate raged throughout England until finally, in the spring of 1766, the Stamp Act was repealed in an effort to avoid rebellion and civil strife in the colonies. At the same time, Parliament issued the Declaratory Act, which stated that Parliament retained the right to make laws which would bind the colonies in America in all cases whatsoever.
This new act don't mention taxes, which means that Parliament has agreed that our assemblies are the only ones with the lawful power to lay taxes upon us. You see that man there? That's our fire-breathing incendiary, Samuel Adams. He used to be a merchant and a tax collector, though he didn't collect much. But his true calling was to speak up against the illegal acts of Parliament and the British officials hereabouts.
The growing turmoil and changing moods of British politics elevated Charles Townshend to Chancellor of the Treasury. The new First Lord promptly proposed the Townshend Revenue Act of 1767, which Parliament passed as a trade law, since it placed import duties on paper, paint pigments, glass, and tea.
Trade law. It's a direct tax. Fact which Sam Adams is pointing out to the king in that letter he's reading to us.
That what a man has honestly acquired is absolutely his own, which he may freely give, but cannot be taken from him without his consent. The American subjects may I, therefore, exclusive of any consideration of charter rights, with a decent firmness adapted to the character of free men and subjects, assert this natural and constitutional right.
We're not buying any goods that's got a duty on it. As for our customs officers, well, we've recently persuaded them to protect their health by taking refuge in one of the British warships in Boston Harbor.
In any case, they're shipping so many goods from England lately, it won't hurt me any. I'll sell anything I have in stock, duty or no duty.
The customs commissioners asked England for help, and in October 1768, 4 regiments of British troops under General Gage arrived in Boston with orders to maintain the peace.
And I'll tell you, they're here to put Massachusetts Bay under martial law.
Once again, Parliament had to choose between enforcing or repealing a tax law. Once again, the law was repealed.
It was repealed except for Mr. Townsend's tax on tea.
And that was retained only as a symbol of Parliament's legislative and taxing powers over the colonies.
This House cannot conclude without expressing their firm confidence in the King, our common head and father, that the united and dutiful supplication of his distressed American subjects will meet with his royal and favorable acceptance.
On March 5th, 1770, the day Parliament repealed the Townshend Act, a rowdy group of Boston citizens surrounded a young British soldier standing guard in front of the Boston Town House, seat of the Massachusetts Assembly. It was a bloody massacre. At least Sam Adams told everyone it was. 5 men were killed, and the British soldiers were acquitted at a trial deemed fair even by the colonists. With most of the Townshend duties repealed, the colonies went back to buying British goods, and relations between England and her American colonies once more relaxed. The iron forges boomed and clanged, while farms provided ample nourishment to an ever-growing population.
Well, we've been having a considerable prosperity for the last 3 years, so it's kind of difficult to keep up with our hates.
Nevertheless, Samuel Adams in Boston, Patrick Henry in Virginia, and a few other radicals continued to attack the British with angry letters and newspaper articles, pamphlets and fiery speeches, constantly reminding the colonists of their natural rights as Englishmen.
If you recall, Sam Adams also started up the first committee of correspondence right in the metropolis of sedition, better known as Boston.
The committee's purpose was to state the rights and grievances of the colonies to the several towns and the world. And there were soon committees of correspondence in the colonies firing messages and propaganda back and forth by fast post rider. And the smuggling of goods, especially of tea, went on unchecked.
Well, I guess you'd have to say it's become kind of a public duty to outwit the British anytime we can do it.
In the spring of 1773, Parliament disturbed the relative peace between England and her colonies when it tried to help the East India Company avoid bankruptcy by allowing it to sell its tea duty-free in America. The colonists could now purchase tea at half the price they paid for tea smuggled from Holland by American merchants. But to the colonies, tea had become a monopoly in the hands of a royal favorite. To the colonists, it was yet another blow to their freedoms. In England, the Boston Tea Party was denounced as the most wanton insult to any government in recorded history.
And our merchants have been warning the tax collectors and circulating petitions against the East India Company. Sam Adams and John Hancock, who's about the richest and most famous importer of tea in these parts, well, they told the governor they didn't want any tea ships unloading in Boston either. Well, the governor, he said the law had to be obeyed. So Sam Adams, he called out the sons of licentiousness. Liberty. And that's how come we happen to be unloading their tea for them. Better than that, we started up a whole epidemic of tea parties in New York, Philadelphia, and other ports of call.
British newspapers aroused the public with demands that Boston, that cankerworm in the heart of America, be taught a lesson. In Parliament, there was a cry for new colonial policies that ruled not by consent, but with force. Early in 1774, Parliament passed 4 new acts.
We call them the Intolerable Acts.
They were designed to punish Massachusetts and to warn the other colonies that to disobey the will of Parliament was to bring forth the wrath of the British Empire. Among the acts was the Boston Port Bill, which ordered the port of Boston closed to all shipping until the East India Company was paid in full for the tea it had lost.
It's an illegal act that allows Parliament to limit our town meetings and assemblies. I'll have no more voice than my horse.
The Administration of Justice Act stated that all British officials and soldiers indicted for criminal acts in connection with their public duties could be taken to another colony or to England for trial.
That's not an act of justice. It's a bill for murder. Now every man Jack paid by the crown can do as he pleases and not be punished.
That distempered brain roars after liberty by rote like a parrot without knowing the meaning of it.
Finally came the Quartering Act, which allowed British troops to be quartered anywhere in Massachusetts, including in private homes.
I'll have no lobster bags at my table.
The subjects of Britain are one.
They're the veriest reptiles on earth.
Batch of miscreants unworthy to administer the law of Britain's empire.
But surely we'll be more secure from mob violence with the soldiers living among us.
You're a damn Tory! A thing with its head in England and its body in America, and its neck ought to be stretched.
I am an Englishman, as you are. And I say that Parliament possesses the legislative power to lay taxes as well as punish the colonies as it sees fit. I say that Parliament is our final legal government.
You can see the mood we're in these days when it comes to our Tory neighbors. Parliament passed another Quebec Act, too, which prevents us from ever expanding west and supports the Pope's followers to the north. And that's not helping our mood any either. As for who's our final legal government, well, the fact is, we've already had a Continental Congress meet down in Philadelphia. And we've got our own delegates sitting in a provincial assembly in Concord right now. Our militia's been training harder lately. And people are looking to their guns more, now that General Gage is using his soldiers to enforce the Intolerable Acts. Well, they even marched up to Salem to get at the arms we got stored there. But they was turned back without a shot being fired.
A toast. Addition to Whigs, subtraction to Tories, multiplication to the friends of liberty, and division to the enemies of America.
On the night of April 18, 1775, several hundred British grenadiers and light infantry were ordered to assemble on Boston Common. Alarm spread through the countryside. British soldiers were on their way to capture the military stores hidden in the village of Concord.
Hear that? It's calling our militia to the green at Lexington. I suppose it's come down to a single fact. That they who refuse to fight for their liberty deserve to be slaves. And we've always governed ourselves. And we always mean to. We mean to keep our liberty.